As I exited my tenement on East 12th Street, the air was warm, and as I looked up, the sky was clear and blue. I started to make my way down and east to my gym on Lafayette Street. It was a little after 8:40, later than I normally leave for the gym, but I didn't have to be at work until 1. Crossing Cooper Square, I passed the Cube and turned onto Lafayette Street facing south as I did every morning. I saw a streak of smoke across the otherwise empty sky. I thought to myself, it must be a smokestack that I had never noticed. I dismissed it, figuring it was because I was here later in the morning, and I continued on. Inside the gym, the loud, tinny dance music was playing as usual. I tried to say hello to Morena at the check-in desk. Looking over, I saw that she and half the people in the gym were staring at the banks of televisions. An airplane hit the World Trade Center, Morena said. What? When? I replied in confusion. Just now, Morena spoke, still not shifting her gaze from the televisions. A few steps forward, and I stood there with the others, eyes fixed on the televisions, watching Tower 1 burning. I grappled with my cell phone, trying to call my friend Dean, who was at my place. He had been staying with me for the past week and was supposed to fly home to London that afternoon. My cell phone kept failing, so I tried the payphone. On the first few attempts, the circuits were busy. Finally, it rang and Dino picked up. Hello, he answered quietly. Turn on the TV, I spoke with my head reeling. I know, Mike, I'm watching, Dean said in his Liverpudlian accent. A moment later, he screamed, Holy fuck, Mikey. Another plane just hit the other tower. Unsteadily, I said, It has to be a terrorist attack. I'll make my way back home. I hung up the phone and realized that I was standing in a world different to the one that I had woken up in. Staring again at the televisions, I watched as plumes of smoke and flame came off the two towers, these two mammoth symbols of New York, burning. I remembered that Gene Simpkin, a friend of mine from high school, often worked out here around this time. I darted up the stairs to find that he and his girlfriend were on the ellipticals in front of other televisions. As I approached, Gene turned his head to me. His round eyes were wide, and he had a big grin on his face. Isn't this great? He exclaimed. What are you talking about? Hundreds of people must be dead, I answered, confused by his indifference. Still looking my direction. Oh, so what? He said with a smirk. My first thought was to punch him in his mouth. Instead, I started to walk away. As I did this, his girlfriend called out after me. There are hundreds of people dying in Jerusalem, and you don't care about that. I turned to her with contempt, sorrow, and incredulity, and said softly, Who says that I don't care? I turned and moved quickly through the gym and back out onto Lafayette Street, looking up in horror at the smoke that I had mistaken earlier for an incinerator. I tried to call my girlfriend Denise, who lives in Colorado. When my cell phone failed again, I realized that many of the reflectors for cell phone service were on top of the World Trade Center. I walked a block south over to a parking lot on the corner of Mercer Street. There I saw for the first time with my own eyes the towers burning. My heart sank and I felt my eyes well up. There were about 20 other people standing there looking on. Some were crying, some were already recapping their stories of how they saw the planes hit. More than half were trying to make calls on their cell phones. Heading back to my apartment on 12th Street, I saw people on their way to work, unaware of the events that were happening. As I walked home, I thought of all the people that I knew and hoped all were safe. I ran up the stairs to the 5th floor. Dino was pacing in front of the television when I entered the apartment. All airports are closed, he told me without surprise in his voice. From the roof of my tenement, there is a great view of the skyline of Lower Manhattan. Some of my neighbors were up there already. There were people on almost every roof as far as we could see. Looking on the towers burning, I felt a sick feeling come over me. We stood there in silence, watching. I once again dialed Denise and it rang. She picked up immediately. What's happening? Are you all right? Her voice strained with worry. I recalled the events of the morning to her. She has no TV and had been listening to the coverage on NPR. I stayed on the phone as I stood watching helplessly as the towers burned. I looked away for a moment and Dean cried out, Mike! I looked up to see Tower 2 collapsing, crumbling with millions of sheets of paper cascading down along with clouds of cement dust. No, 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 I repeated over and over and began to sob. Denise, still on the other end of the line, frightened, said, What's happened? Choking on my words, I said, "It's falling. The fucking World Trade Center is falling. Thousands of people are dying." I sat down on the roof, crying. Dean came over and put his hand on my shoulder. I stopped crying, wiped the tears from my eyes, and stood back up. "Denise, I have to go down there. They're going to need help." Denise now began to sob and beg that I don't go. People that see things like that are never the same again. She made me promise not to go, but I knew that it was a promise I wasn't going to keep. I told Dino that I was going down to the Trade Center to volunteer. "You don't have to come with me, but I have to go," I told him. He without hesitation said that he was coming. My respect for him grew right then. Outside, we walked quickly down the block, but paused when I saw my friend Ray Santiago outside his storefront apartment, his girlfriend in tears next to him. "Ray, we're going to volunteer. Do you want to come?" "Maybe later," he said, as if I asked him if he wanted to go eat lunch. "This is some fucked up shit," Ray said. I agreed, and Dean and I went on our way. On 5th Street, there were a couple of police officers standing on the stoop in front of the 9th Precinct. "We want to volunteer. Where can we do that?" I said to the younger of the two. "I don't know what to tell you, buddy," the officer shook his head. "We don't even know where half our guys are." As we walked off, the older officer called after us. "If I were you, I'd just start walking downtown, if you want to volunteer." I nodded. The air was filled with sirens from every direction. When we got to Houston Street, we saw fire engines and police cars all making their way down to the towers. We cut down Christie Street alongside of the park. We seemed to be the only two people in the whole city trying to go downtown. Everyone else wanted to be going north. A short man with a Puerto Rican flag printed on his t-shirt stopped briefly in front of us. "The other tower is falling." Then he walked off as quickly as he stopped. Dino and I ran a block to get to a clearing so we could see if this were in fact true. "What's today's date, Dino?" I asked as we jogged down the street. "September 11th, he answered. We got to a clearing where we should have been able to see the remaining tower. The man with the flag on his shirt was right. All we could see was a mushroom-like cloud of smoke and debris where the tower should have been. We continued down and west to Bowery. At Chatham Square, I first noticed the mass exodus of people. Cars and trucks attempting to get out of the city or at least away from downtown. As we crossed Chatham, I saw a young woman in the center of the street. She had no shoes and was caked from head to toe in gray dust. To me, it looked tribal, as if it was part of some sort of ritual. I didn't know what I was looking at. Her eyes met mine for a moment. She was in shock. At the courthouses, the police were there trying to stop anyone from going further south. Not that there were many trying to go south. There were 2 ambulances parked up on the median in front of the courthouse. A couple more people caked in dust were being given oxygen. I asked one of the paramedics if he knew where we could volunteer. "I heard that they were mobilizing volunteers on the south side of City Hall Park," he said. There were hordes of police holding their positions, waiting for orders to come amidst the confusion. The yellow tape started going up, and we had been standing around waiting for about 15 minutes. I told Dean that we should try to slip by the police and move farther south. He looked more apprehensive than he had earlier, but he shrugged in acceptance, and we moved forward. Sergeant Lopez of the NYPD was the first to lift his hand, stopping us. Immediately, I repeated what the paramedic had told us. "I heard that they were mobilizing volunteers on the south side of City Hall Park." To both of our surprise, Lopez waved us on. We got by several other cops that way, substituting the name with the name of the last cop that waved us past. Eventually, we arrived at City Hall Park. There was no mobilization of volunteers, just thick dust, paper and smoke being carried by the wind, cops covered in soot that had been down at the towers when they collapsed, and a few doctors with a small cart of medical supplies. The cops asked everyone to stay there. They looked as frightened as the rest of us. We went over to the doctors and they gave us masks and latex gloves. Moments after, the cops waved them in and we slipped past with them. In the smoke and confusion, we lost our way and wound up at South Ferry. There was a triage station set up, but no one was being brought in. Not knowing what to do, we waited with them. A paramedic who had been at the towers when they fell told me that she had seen people jumping to escape the flames. "How many people?" Dean asked in horror. She lowered her eyes and said, "I stopped counting at 10. I tried a bank of payphones and was able to call Denise Collect. She wasn't angry that I broke my promise. I asked her to call my father and let him know that I was okay because I couldn't get through. After 45 minutes, I realized that we weren't going to be much use at South Ferry, so Dean and I headed toward the smoke and fire where the towers once stood. A thick layer of dust and paper coated everything. The smell of burning grew stronger as we moved closer to ground zero. Firemen and police sat on curbs with blank looks in their eyes in shock. The smoke and dust started to get into our mouths and throats, choking us. We arrived at ground zero. Nothing looked like it had. Rubble and debris covered the streets. What had been once New York's tallest buildings were now reduced to a pile of shattered concrete, with I-beams forming bizarre spires. Trying to get our bearings, we went into the lobby of One Liberty Plaza. There were about 10 other civilians there wanting to volunteer. Everyone looked frightened and confused. Police and firemen were gathered, trying to figure out their next steps. One small group of firefighters broke off and headed up the stairs to put out fires on the upper floors of the building where we stood. It was chaos. There were no guidelines for an attack of this size, and I realized that if we were going to be of service, we had to figure it out for ourselves. I grabbed Dean and we headed back outside. It was twilight now, and there were generators humming, powering the emergency lights set up along the perimeter of the destruction. A complex web of fire hoses were strewn along the ground in every direction, and the backwash flooded the streets. I knew that there was a firehouse right across from the towers. I remembered it from when I had been down here with Denise and her sons a couple of months before. I asked a passing fireman where it was, and he pointed west. "Right down there," he said, not looking, not stopping. Dino and I climbed over the debris and hoses and headed in the direction the fireman had pointed. We arrived at Tenhouse, the fire station immediately adjacent to where the towers had been. There was a partly crushed ambulance half in and half out of the fire station door, but the building still stood. Inside, there were firefighters from different fire companies from across New York City, a group of doctors and police. Dino and I were asked to help wash out the eyes of smoke-battered firefighters. They equipped us with bags of saline and those folded paper towels that one would find in a public restroom. I spent the next many hours cradling the heads of these brave men, washing the soot out of their pained, sorrowful eyes. I could feel the horror that they had seen that day. Late in the evening, I saw a fireman standing out in front of Tenhouse, holding his phone to the sky, trying without luck to get a signal. My phone had been working intermittently, so I walked over. "My phone might work," I said, handing it to him. "I haven't been able to let my family know that I'm alive." His voice broke. On the other end, the phone was picked up almost before it could ring. He promised his wife that he was okay and that he loved her. I could feel the extraordinary relief on the other end of the line. She put their young son on the phone. "Daddy's okay. Daddy's alive." He choked back his tears. A line of firemen formed, and they used the phone to have similar conversations until the battery died. As they spoke to their terrified and relieved families, I sat on the ground in front of Tenhouse, and the gravity of what had happened washed over me.